Good morning and welcome to the second event in the Bowdoin College Library's Beyond the Reading Room Archives in the World online series. We are so delighted to have all of you in the audience today with a special welcome to Professor Mary Hart's drawing students. It's wonderful to see so many friends and colleagues and students joining us in the audience today. My name is Marika van der Steenhoven, and I'm the Special Collections Education and Outreach Librarian at the Bowdoin College Library. And it is my honor to welcome you to today's talk with visual artist Angela Lorenz. We are grateful to the Harold and Iris Chandler Lectureship Fund, which has sponsored the Beyond the Reading Room series, in which we feature artists and scholars who rely on archival research for their work. Each speaker has a connection to Bowdoin Library's George J. Mitchell Department of Special Collections and Archives, either having consulted our collections or having their own work represented therein. I also want to give a big thanks to Tony Sprague, who is behind the scenes helping us manage this webinar, as well as all of our others in this series and as well as in our other programs. So thank you to Tony. Before I introduce today's speaker, I hope you'll indulge me as I share some of our upcoming programming that I hope you will join us for. On Friday, April 2nd at 12:30 p.m., we welcome Marshall Eliff, who is project leader at eBird and a Bowdoin class of 1997, who will be our guest speaker at our monthly page turning of John James Audubon's Double Elephant Folio Birds of America. The following Friday, April 9th at noon, we welcome Director of Research at the Massachusetts Historical Society, Kid Wong's-Rich Anali, who is Bowdoin class of 2003, and he'll be giving a talk entitled Nothing Like Having a Good Repository, the Archive as Teacher, Counselor, and Diversifier of the Past. On Tuesday, April 13th at noon, we will be co-presenting with the Peary Macmillan Arctic Museum a talk with research scientist Spencer Apollino, Bowdoin class of 1955, whose papers recently arrived in Special Collections and Archives. And our final program for the semester will take place Friday, April 9th at 12:30 p.m. when we welcome back Audubon biographer Peter Logan, who is another Bowdoin alum, class of 1975, to our Audubon page turning event. All of our programs take place online and are free and open to all, and you can find out more information and register at our website, library.bowdoin.edu/ARCH. That website again is library.bowdoin.edu/arch. It is truly an honor to introduce today's speaker. Visual artist Angela Lorenz resides in New England with annual stays in Bologna, Italy, where she's joining us from today. Her watercolors, prints, multiples, and artist books live in over 100 public collections in the US and abroad and have been widely exhibited. She received her BA in Fine Arts and Semiotics from Brown University, which included classes at RISD in graphics and glass and a year at the University of Bologna. Lorenz's work is both in the permanent collections of and has been exhibited at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the National Gallery of Art, the Clark Art Institute, the Portland Museum of Art, the Addison Gallery of American Art, the Walker Art Center, the Brooklyn Museum, National Museum of Women in the Arts, and the British Library. Other collections include Smithsonian's American Art Museum, the Getty, the Fogg Art Museum, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the Albertina Museum, the Victoria and Albert Museum. Other exhibits include Mass MoCA, Tufts University Art Gallery, the Farnsworth Art Museum, Davis and Langdale, and the Yale University Art Gallery. Teaching and critiquing engagements include resident faculty at Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, artists in residence at the Addison Gallery of American Art, and adjunct faculty at NYU. In 2019, Lorenz received the award for Outstanding Contribution to the Art of the Book by the Center for Book Arts in New York. At the Bowdoin College Library, we are the caretakers of over a dozen of Angela's books, and they feature prominently in our teaching program, being used by students in the visual arts, art history, digital and computational studies, Italian studies, and much more. The Museum of Art also has several paintings of Angela's in their collection, most based on her incredible graphic novel that features the magnificent conical character Red. The moment I first encountered one of Angela's artist books was over a decade ago, and it is still a very visceral memory. There is Red. The book that I first encountered was Soap Story. The text of this story, a soap opera of sorts about a young woman in Italy, is silk screened onto 6 linen pages, each of which is encased in soap. To access each page, you must use the cube of soap and then hang it to dry. I recall my pure confusion turning to absolute delight as I began to piece together this magnificent work and to discover so many more layers. For example, the resonance between the detail in the story of the young woman using stones to wash her clothing, and that the typeface used being stone serif and stone sans. Angela's artist books are all magnificently thoughtful, thoroughly and well-researched, and full of truly remarkable and witty humor. What's even more enjoyable, in my opinion, than simply engaging with Angela's work is having the opportunity to talk with her about it. And I am so honored and grateful to welcome her here today to speak with us. If you have questions, we're going to ask you to enter those in the Q&A form, which you can find on the bottom toolbar screen. You can type in your question throughout the program, and we will address those at the end of the program. You also have the opportunity to upvote other people's questions. So if you see something that you really want to hear answered, you can just click a little, I think it's a little thumbs up. So Angela Lorenz, thank you so much for joining us. It is really wonderful to welcome you to Bowdoin again, albeit virtually.
Thanks, that's very kind. All right, gonna work quickly. So we have time for a Q&A. I'm only showing about 5 pieces, but there's a lot to talk about. So today we're really talking about material culture and visual culture, which is at the heart of my work. So it's the stuff of archives, libraries, and museums. And there's debates today about what should be in archives. Is it ethical to own it or display it? Should it be returned? This regards ethnographic material, stolen art and artifacts taken by governments and others during times of war and genocide, especially. It regards trafficked items and people, things that have been illegally excavated or stolen. Things in museums and libraries and archives are now being analyzed with regard to provenance, so where they came from, but also in regard to function and meaning, especially regarding objects considered to be sacred or human remains. So this is a great period of questioning and an effort to reimagine archives and museums as more welcoming spaces that serve the public more effectively. So that's sort of added to my work in archives. That's sort of what I was thinking about. So another sort of like, well, let's say a caveat. I just wanted to say that, people think I know more than I do. And I just wanted to point out that I have a lot of superficial knowledge and trivia, and that making art about things or drawing things helps you see better and helps you remember. It doesn't matter if you don't draw well. You'll see things you didn't before. Your eyes have seen things, but it doesn't register in the brain. But if you try to draw something, you will see it. So the other thing is, in terms of research, is the importance of listening. So I don't remember what I read, unfortunately. I'm not blessed with a photographic memory. That would be my secret power, maybe, if I could have one. But I do remember individual conversations. I listen really closely. We learn well through anecdote. So anyways, by creating art that incorporates and communicates knowledge, I'm able to remember it more. And that's why people think I know more than I do. So moving along, I think there's different ways to think about archives. And so for me personally, I have my own archives, which is part of my collecting practice. Part of my art practice is actually collecting because I study things. I use them in many different ways. And this includes ephemera and objects. Another archives that I possess are my process archives. And so those are the bits and pieces that are involved in the making of my work, and even the trash. So those process archives are actually collected by other people. There's 3 process archives of mine at the British Library, Tufts University, that's the School of the Museum of Fine Arts at Tufts, and also the first location is RISD, so in special collections at RISD. And I created they did an exhibition of my process materials at RISD and also collaterally at Brown. And this catalog was created not with images of finished work necessarily, but all about how the work was made and the process items, because I think that sometimes it's easier to understand objects when you see the materials used in making them, and the trash, the things that get discarded. So the third way that archives are connected to me is my research in other archives, and that's mainly what we're addressing. So pretty much all of the work that I'm showing you today and all of the research, this was done before the internet existed. So the communications had to take place with letters, telephone, and fax. There was no digitization. And I think just to kind of put you in the headspace of where I came from, I should perhaps mention my very first research project using primary research. So when I was 16, I had to write a 40-page, 35-page history research paper using primary research. And so that involved, on Saturday mornings, taking a bus to Boston and spending time in the Boston Public Library, accessing hundreds of old magazines, using a paper card catalog to find them, and also using microfilm with special machines, and you had to look at this stuff. So accessing all of this material in archives, and the purpose was to find out about the role of women in the workplace during and after World War II, or let's say before, during, and after World War II, and the propaganda, the communications around that, that presented women as all of a sudden powerful, capable, intelligent, necessary in defeating the Axis forces, Germany, etc., in World War II, aiding the war effort, being essential workers, and then afterwards, other propaganda to kind of get them back into the home again. So anyways, that's what I worked on. But it's interesting that a year earlier, when I was 15 years old, I did a couple summer jobs to earn spending money to last me throughout the year. One of them was pulling editions of Collograph prints all by myself in an artist studio. She was off working in her shop, and I was pulling editions of her prints. And that's because I have a very strong background, starting at the time I was 14 in printmaking, and there's definitely printmaking and works on paper is a big part of my work. So the other job is more relevant. I was working as an archivist for a conspiracy theorist. So my town was very, very small, 5,000 people. seaside town north of Boston, where you could bike and walk, luckily safely, to the library and other places. So a wonderful place, a privileged place to grow up. And this, it paid better than babysitting to work doing printmaking and work as basically an archivist. So there were piles and piles and boxes of clippings and Xeroxes. This man was obsessed with conspiracy theories, specifically the connections between Lincoln's murder, Kennedy's murder, Dr. Martin Luther King's murder, and Mary Kopechne's accidental death, or not, if you're a conspiracy theorist. So that was pretty fascinating. And I had to come up with subject headings and organize all of this material into file boxes. And so I think that was good preparation for my US history project using primary materials. And then it sort of informed my life going forward a bit. But in terms of collecting, I read all the time as a child. A lot of nonfiction, or let's say nonfiction created for children, which in the form of biographies, like there were a couple different series of biographies. So I read, like 100 of these, really interesting figures from all different walks of life in the United States and Hawaii and other places, men and women. So it was really interesting and inspiring. But I also read wonderful, exciting adventure type stories where there was, discoveries and mysteries and treasures to be found. So I don't know, probably most children, I wanted to find treasure, and that wasn't really happening. But one time I did find, to me, the closest to what could be an antique treasure, but is probably just a piece of like furniture, probably just a brass, a little kind of a lion face. So I have this with me still today. Found this as a child on a rocky beach north of Boston. And yes, it just kind of was like, maybe I found some treasure. So I did start collecting things as a child. I started collecting boxes early on, and a lot of these boxes were packaging, and some of them were, tobacco tins or things. And I would wonder, because for some reason, I'm sort of obsessed with the lives of inanimate objects. I was like, oh my gosh, like in what factory did somebody pack the tobacco into this tin? And, I'd look for little addresses and things like that. And I'd think about that. So that was probably my first awareness of packaging. And there's something else about these that later, of course, I thought was more interesting. I don't think I reflected on it at the time. And it's that packaging tells us so much about culture because, for example, a lot of this packaging, it had factories with like smokestacks and smoke coming out of them, which is, like that's the last thing you want to be promoting. Hey, my company pollutes. But at one time, in the Industrial Revolution, in it, all over Europe, United States, that was like progress. That is, we have an important, that was the corporate sort of branding of the time. So yes, packaging, but packaging teaches us, so not just about environmental things, but also a lot of racism. So lots and lots of racism in packaging and ephemera. And so archives are full of these, but people, real researchers. I'm an artist that uses research. I don't create research for the most part. All of this information is accessible and available, and people have been working patiently for decades to make it available. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Another thing that sort of informed me, my love of material culture and my early collections, I had access to it through a grandmother who would show me finely wrought miniature things, and I became obsessed with miniatures, which I guess is something that's like a sign of an introvert, is like perfection and miniaturism. But this has to do also with collections and history of collections. So I have another artifact for you today, and it's recycled. Another thing that I study, recycling over thousands of years, innovation, reuse. So this is from, I guess there was a cigar packaging that came in a glass tube and it had a little top. So, so part of it is this cigar. It's a Producto cigar. So I used it for my very sophisticated cheese packaging for my dollhouse, for my trolls. And so I put modeling clay, and I found in the house a brass seal for sealing wax, and it had an L. I mean, my name is Lorenz, so somebody must have got it at some point. And so I imprinted with modeling clay, and I imprinted an L. So my trolls, I think their name was also Lorenz. I don't know. It certainly ended with an L. And so I became fascinated from an early age to kind of hyper realism, facsimiles, taking real soap, making it into a chip, taking real washcloths, making it into their towels. And they had a magnificent bathtub of blue glass. It was an old salt cellar. But I'm particularly proud of the flooring of the bathroom, which was Scrabble tiles turned over so you didn't see the letters. So I made a wooden parquet floor. Okay, enough of that. But my collecting has continued in my fascination with making things and with people that have been making things for thousands of years, and going and looking at that. And before we move on from the collecting and the artifacts, I just had a couple things that I think are interesting. So this is a polyfunctional object that you can't really see what's going on, but through this lens, my hand wobbles too much, is a micro photograph. This is like almost 200 years old, of Da Vinci's Last Supper in fine detail. So it's a micro photograph of an etching of Da Vinci's Last Supper. And this thing, which is made out of bone, this isn't worth a lot of money. You can go on the internet. It's not something expensive. So it unscrews the handle, and you could store needles in it. So this is one of my categories of collecting, everything having to do with sewing. So I'm interested in sewing, I'm interested in writing, I'm interested in language, reading, the history of reading to other people, many interests. And here's another thing that relates to Bologna, because artifacts and relics and trade are at the basis of all of these problematic things that I talked about in the beginning. So I'm going to try to light it up for you a little. So this thing, once again, might have cost $10 or $15 in Bologna, in the piazza near my house, where they have an antique market, which I avoid because I'm sort of done collecting. I need to use what I have. And it's a contact relic, supposedly, pretty humble, with brass, made by nuns. Nuns had their communities that they did everything and raised all the money to keep going. Then they would get too powerful and they would get broken up and destroyed. But one of the very famous nuns, who was a musician and a writer and illustrated manuscripts, was this woman named Saint Catherine of Bologna. So this supposedly has a piece of cloth of hers, or that at least touched hers. So it's a contact relic. So I collect things, I study things, but you don't have to own things. You can take photographs of things and you can study them on the internet, thankfully. So people say, well, how do you store your collections? I say, okay. So this says ephemera on it, everything's backwards. So I just, I make these sleeves, I get plastic sleeves, and I put stuff in binders that I label. so to address some of the things that I mentioned in the beginning, I thought I would show you one category I have. It's that speaks again to racism and propaganda, but it's not packaging. And I wouldn't normally collect something like this. Usually the things I think that are the most awful things, they kind of come into my collections by mistake, because they're in an album already with mixed things, or it's one illustration in a book, or there'll be a group of postcards or something. And so I'm horrified by some of the things that I find, and I don't even know what to do with them or how to use them. I find them so toxic. So sometimes I give them away to people that use them in their own artwork, that maybe could use them and better than I could. So, okay, this is very disturbing. And it's propaganda, but it's propaganda. Okay, so here you have an image, and this is actually in English on the front, which is very strange. But the reason for that is it's propaganda and it's fake news. On the back, everything's in Italian. Okay, so this was to try to dissuade Italians at the end of World War II, to dissuade them from becoming an ally of the United States. And in fact, in Italian at the back, it says that in Italian, this is a original reproduction from the American newspaper Life from the 12th of June, 1944, page 8. Well, it's a really bad mashup. It's obvious propaganda, but it's a skull that was like collaged in next to an attractive woman, and it says, a precious gift from her boyfriend. Arizona war worker writes her Navy boyfriend a thank you note for the Jap skull he sent her. Okay. And then in Italian, it says, these are the gentilities and civilities of American women, United States women. And it goes on in a very sarcastic tone, and then ends with, long live the liberators, long live the American civilization. Okay, this was dropped behind, distributed to Italians, dropped behind lines. So when people think about propaganda and fake news and how it circulates today, at one time, these were printed materials that then were dropped from airplanes behind enemy lines and circulated. And this other one, this is just so horrible. It's just plays into all of the anti-Semitic tropes. And it says rich man's war, poor man's fight, and with just disgusting symbols. And then it's in English on the back, and it says, this was for Americans. This was to try to dissuade Americans, American soldiers. And you're ready to lay down your life for such a mob of undeserving profiteers, politicians, and despoilers. So it's sort of like you don't have any stake in the outcome of this war. It's not going to improve your life. And then the last one is, oh, it's cute. Looks like, little old clocks. This is in Italian on the back, and it says, just 5 more minutes. And it's about basically to the Italians, don't abandon the German war effort because Churchill's afraid, because in 5 minutes, the German forces are going to beat them. So this is historical ephemera. So sometimes I buy antique objects, but then I also just find trash on the ground. And here's a binder page, and these are manuscript maps. So I have manuscripts, so post-its that are handwritten have all different categories in the manuscript section, including maps. One thing I did for a long time until the lira ended and the euro came was I collected money that people had written notes on. So they were, this is before cell phones. People were circulating little text messages on money in Italy. won't get into why, but so these collections, which I try to organize and circulate, have themselves been exhibited. And that happened first in Venice in an exhibition, and then it went to Smith College special collections, and then some of it went to Brown University. And it was all sort of a big buildup to the graphic novel that Marika referred to, that was my way to try to get this character out into the world with trademark and copyright and sort of previous art, how to protect my own character so I could just use it freely. But it sort of shows why I collected a lot of this stuff in the first place, and that is to make watercolor paintings. So throughout the 90s, when I was first living in Italy, I'd been a student earlier, but then I ended up marrying an Italian. And I enjoyed making paintings of ephemera, and I didn't think it was my best work. So artists will have all sorts of different kinds of practices. And sometimes they're afraid to show certain elements of what they do because they think that it might not be significant enough or valued by other people. Well, it was private work. I was making artist books and circulating those, and my watercolors I really enjoyed doing, but it was private. So strangely, in order to tell the story of Red being trapped in an artist studio in Bologna, and how Red's escape route out into the world, I went back and looked at all of my ephemera to try to tell Red's story. But because I also want to communicate lots of other things, I talked about a lot of things that are important today, like mental health is definitely a big theme, and things having to do with mobility. Red can't really get around, can't really travel or access buildings. So, you have things that have to do with body image and all sorts of things. And I'm able to use artifacts and ephemera to harness my narrative. So I just want to show this one other page. So you see these faces, and some of the faces, this was a game that predated the Potato Heads. So it was British. It's called Funny Faces, and it had like a potato-like head, but just paper, flat, and then all of the different things, and you would make the kind of face that you wanted. All sorts of different choices. So I find games are part of ephemera, and they teach us about values in societies and discrimination and all sorts of things. But I find them to be a great source of inspiration. And so I've made 3 artist games so far, and artists have been making games since the Surrealists. So I also just want to point out, just, so in terms of like how people perceive themselves or worry about certain things, but there's this is like a nose contest. So this is from the 19th century. It's a little stamp that I found. And so all over the world, like in Turkey, I discovered, and also in Italy, there were nose contests, and people would win prizes for different kinds of noses, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, so ephemera, archives, lots of interesting stuff, lots of food for thought. Okay. On to the work. So the piece that I'm going to show first was the one that I sort of promoted, and this is Binding Ties. And these are based on British regimental neckties. This is a piece about the history of trade. And the whole reason that I did this was because at an antique shop in Maine, I found an antique game that's called the South American Travel and Trading Game. It was made in 1941, and it taught young Americans what raw materials to extract from Central and South America and what refined products to sell them. So it kind of taught them how to exploit Central and South America. Well, this has been going on for, since the 1500s in Italy, in Europe. There's a particularly powerful family called the Fuggers, who they're originally from Antwerp, and they developed the most incredible communications, transportation, and trade network. So you kind of need those three elements. And they got permission from different countries and rulers, to take over like huge swaths of South America. And they had offices all over the world, in Asia, etc. This is in the 1500s, and they made a lot of money. So anyways, but trade and exploitation, it's the history of the world and artifacts, and it goes back before then. So I was so sort of freaked out by that game that I thought, okay, I want to turn this into a work of art. And Binding Ties is the result. But when I started to do more research, history is nuanced, and it's very important to learn about it, because things are always changing, and the situations in a small period of time or in a certain place, they don't fit the whole narrative. It's not easy to generalize in history. And so I learned about that through scholars. So I'm an artist that uses scholarly material, but I don't generate scholarly material. So I wrote as kind of a little teaser on my Instagram of how did I find the necessary information I needed to represent these 6 regimental ties with that saw action in colonial wars in Africa and India, etc. So I went to like every war museum and military museum in London, learned some very interesting things. I highly recommend the Imperial War Museum. It's fantastic to learn about how cultures are, the ingenuity that arises in times of desperation. So very, very interesting. I contacted Sandhurst, which is this military academy in England, and their archivist, and no, we don't have anything on that. So this is the answer to the question. So I went to Oxford Street. I went to the stores that were still selling regimental ties, not many. And I asked them, and they had archives. So businesses, so like textile manufacturers in Italy on Lake Como, they have incredible archives. Some of them even have artist residencies. And so the photograph that I put on the Instagram, but also that I reproduce in this catalog that's called Creating with Abandon, as the title. So this was a photograph I took in the store on Oxford Street, and it had all the information I needed on the regimental ties. And then I went to the last company still making regimental ties in East London called PL Cells. They gave me scraps, and I learned a whole lot more. And then I included a piece of scrap of a regimental tie in every edition of the case of this book. So, okay. That pretty much covers it, but I just feel like, since this is the centerpiece, I want to spend a little time, and I'm going to read some of the poems, because there's an interlining in each tie. That's the part inside the silk. And there's die cuts. And if you pull up the interlining of the tie, all of a sudden, a rubber stamped poem appears. So this just gets to the complexity of trade and how it isn't static, and how we need to analyze history carefully. It doesn't go chronologically, it goes east to west. And the first example is about the Wagis in Papua New Guinea. So the Wagis were only discovered about 80 years ago. So when this was made, this poem, it was only like 60 years ago. And I'm just going to show a couple books by a man named Michael O'Hanlon, who worked for the Museum of Mankind in London, and which then, folded back into the British Museum. And I don't know, I think he went on to another institution, but just very patient, interesting research, very respectful, very useful. And I learned a lot from him. And also from this other book by Nicholas Thomas called Entangled Objects. And so we're talking about the 80s. So I was studying this stuff in the 80s and the early 90s. So there's so much information about this that was published a long time ago. And it's only recently that the public has become more conscious of these studies and this information, and museums and libraries. But a lot of wonderful research has been done decades ago. So it's really a matter of getting information out there. So the Entangled Objects and Michael Hanlon's work and the 1941 Parker Brothers game, they all helped me write the poems of this piece. And also I worked with professors from Johns Hopkins International Master's Program, which is around the corner. It's called SICE. And they were very helpful in pointing me to information. So what happened with the Wagi is they had never had any contact with people outside, because they were in highlands and remote areas of Papua New Guinea, and they happened to be cultivating coffee on their own. They were discovered when coffee had this, it was like crazy, sort of like tulips, and it had really high value in the 1960s or something when they were discovered. So they had already this incredible cash crop, and they all of a sudden had piles of cash. So it's sort of like, then what did they do with it? How did they use it in their culture? So I wrote a poem about that. But another example is actually back in the 1700s, and it had to do with the Marquesas Islands. And I'm just going to read a little bit. So pre-colonial sailors in Marquesian ports sought native pigs, putting owners out of sorts. Marquesian pigs were not for exchange, so islanders hid them out of range. On foreign trade, they did not depend, complicating barter from the Western end. So there was this micro situation in which there were sailors from Europe. They were hungry. They wanted pigs. Nope. We don't use our pigs in that way. We don't sell them. They're sacred. We, ceremonies, blah, blah, blah. However, 2 years later, the sailors came back and they had guns. So then at that point, they handed over the pigs. So, it's interesting to look at the very detailed situations. And I think another thing that I learned a lot from in this Entangled Objects and research of other people is that in trade, you might think you're pulling the wool over someone's eyes because you're trading, you're getting their artifacts, but you're trading, broken glass, or muskets that didn't work anymore. So old things that didn't work. But instead, what it meant in some of the indigenous cultures is they were able to arrange incredible marriages. So it became an object of prestige and wealth that enabled them and changed the outcomes of families just because they possessed these objects that for the people that traded, they didn't have any value. So it's complicated, and we need to look carefully. And then I think the one that it was inspired by the game specifically, it lists the materials from the card of the game, and I'll just read it. Argentina's tungsten, Paraguay's manganese, Mexico's silver, Nicaragua's trees, Chilean nitrates, Bolivian tin, the raw went out and manufactured came in. Foreign resource to extract, manufacture, then sell back. Turn the steel into automobile, lay the railroad track. So that, the center text is specifically based on the 1941 Parker Brothers game. So it's, I really enjoy doing research, and I try to communicate it through art. So looking at the time, need to be conscious of the time, but I'm going to show a couple other things. So another book that I made that had to do with research in London, it's called Riddle. It comes in a box, and you open it up and you see text that you are forced to read without seeing anything else. So it gives people a chance to maybe guess the riddle, figure it out. And this is extremely meta, because this foam block, it actually has the artist book inside. And the audience, the public, has to kind of find the book. So like when you're trying to research, you're trying to discover something, and the actual book is hidden inside. And what I tried to do is, once again, it teaches about artifacts and their meaning, including exploitation, for example. But I also tried to make a subject that people think is so boring into something fascinating. So I'll tell you the clue. It's actually wallpaper is the answer to the question. But like in the first line, it was chosen for prisoners and ministers alike. And it's like, what? People chose wallpaper for prisoners? This was the prisoners' wallpaper. So this gets to research at the Victoria and Albert Museum in the print collection. Best access ever. Even 30 years ago, you could walk off the street, sign in, and access materials. So you have to make appointments ahead. In most places, of course, they can't accommodate you, but you can do that for free at any museum, university, etc. around the world. You don't need letters of recommendation anymore. You did back in the day at many places. So that's become very easy, luckily. But there's all these curious and unusual things about wallpaper. So I tried to communicate ideas and make wallpaper fascinating to people. So the next the line in it is, it reflected foreign travels and conquests. So once again, how do images get into our vocabulary, into our wallpaper, into our textiles, etc.? So it's drawing attention to that. But conscious of time, I'm going to move along to research at the University of Bologna Library, which is actually turned also into a museum. And I did this piece called The Theater of Nature, that's specifically about collections in museums and museology and their architecture, and what were the precursors, and what happened in the 1500s and 1600s, and then what happened when the Enlightenment came, and all of a sudden people used teaching collections in different ways. So the piece that I made involved looking at like 15,000 slides. Because in many cases you can't, they don't let you touch or see some of the original archival materials. You have to have a really good reason. And thankfully, many things are digitized now, so you can even see them from your home. So I reproduced watercolors. I did a series of 81 watercolors and put 9 different ones in each book. And then I did etchings of images of the earliest images we have of museums in Europe. And we don't have images of all of them. Many of the collections are only lists. So what I wanted to say about that is that these collections, the first public history museum was mostly natural history by Ulysses Aldrovandi in the 1500s. Now it's part of all of the university collections. They kind of made a best of collections in this building from the 1500s. It's very beautiful. And I've been taking people there for 30 years. And it's a didactic collection. It's so weird that, you know, there's these antique ships, these model ships, very ornate. And, but it's a teaching collection. I always said, you know, it's used to teach navigation, et cetera, et cetera. But in terms of talking about decolonizing archives or museums, or, you know, looking at them differently, one of the ships was rowed by humans. It's a galley from the de Medici family, and it was actually gifted while these galleys, which are rowed by slaves, which they could be Christian, they could be Turkish, they could be from North Africa, a lot of Muslim slaves. So at a certain point in like 1550, one of the de Medicis decided to create a new order of Santo Stefano and or really organize all of these boats because they were constantly used throughout the Mediterranean, and they worked better because you didn't always need wind power. And then built prison structures, one in particular in Livorno, which became a really interesting place, sort of like the Macau of Renaissance Italy, where anything goes. And he invited people of all religions, you know, Jews, Turks, whatever, wear all the clothes you want. You don't need to identify yourself as Jewish, or you can practice anything you want, trade, gambling, and made this incredible prison complex also with mosques in it. And then there were, you know, temples throughout the city. So this lasted for about 200 years, from 1550 to 1750. So there's these microcosms, and it's all sort of wrapped up in trade and communications. And it's very interesting stuff, and I invite other people to look at it. So I did want to talk more, but I am also conscious of answering questions. So what do you say, Marika?
Well, perhaps we can weave a little bit of what you were going to say into some answering some questions, if that works.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe just quickly, just 1 minute.
Please.
So something from the United States research. I did on my own. I've actually never been funded. Artists have trouble getting funded. Money tends to go to researchers, people with masters and PhDs, and it's a shame, but I can't do anything about it. So there's like these 3 notebooks here. I looked at 3,500 paintings, landscape paintings by Edward Lear, who's known as a poet, a comic poet at Houghton Library at Harvard. And these have all since been digitized. So if you say, you know, into the internet, you just say Houghton Library, Edward Lear, this incredible finding aid comes up, and you can look at every single painting. And these are, you know, his goal in life was to be a monumental landscape painter. But these watercolor sketches that he did were personal work he hoped to use for getting commissions. And so what I did was I annotated. The weird thing is there's words all throughout them, and he's not just like telling himself what color this is, indicating something in the landscape. He's saying, I'm being bothered by fleas. This weather is terrible. You know, the heat is, you know, punishing, etc. So the next step after the notebooks is then I transcribed them all onto paper, life-sized. And then after that, I did oil paintings of his words, how he wrote them in the landscape, whether the text was like lying down and lots of silliness all throughout, almost like a diary. So that is called wordscapes or parolesaggi. And I think there's another piece on that has to do with the British Library, I'll just quickly say. So I got interested, as you know, in relics and reliquaries and pilgrimage in particular, and tourism and how they interrelate. But then at a certain point, I was like, Pilgrims Progress, what's that? Pilgrim? And I got sidetracked. And this is another game. It's a puzzle. It's a puzzle map. It's from like the earliest jigsaw puzzles. It's from the 1700s. And it is the map of the journey within this book, The Pilgrim's Progress, that was the biggest bestseller next to the Bible for almost 400 years. And Bunyan was basically writing to people that were barely literate. So instead of using the map that I thought I would, there's almost no text in the game that I created that's like Candyland. And the text, the map only is on the cover of 3 little pamphlets that teach you how to use it. That's within it. So, you know, I study material and then I think very carefully how to use it. So I'll end there.
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute myself. Angela, thank you so much. You have given, I mean, so much to reflect on, and it's just such a beautiful example of the various roles that objects can play, whether they're in an archive, whether you're building your own, and just the ties that you made to the impact or the memories of various moments in time influencing your work was just really resonated with me. So thank you so much. I could listen to you. You know, it's too bad this isn't a day-long program because I would be here for that. But let's get to, we have some questions. And the first comes from Professor Mary Hart, who again is here with her drawing students and is curious as to how drawing comes into your practice. Do you think of it mostly for planning purposes?
Okay, this is actually a good question. The weird thing is I don't draw. I only like to paint. So I only use a paintbrush. So like I do generate a lot of imagery, but drawing isn't my strong point. For some reason, I just seem to do better with a brush, perhaps a very detailed brush. So what I do with drawing is it's like really rudimentary just for information purposes. And what I end up doing is working directly with brush and watercolor. That's my usual form of drawing. And some people call them watercolor drawings. I don't know, but I paint. That's but I use imagery and I reproduce it. And I'm sorry that it didn't have a bigger play in the conversation today, which I knew for your drawing class would be sad, but perhaps you can come and see some things in the collection that do involve more drawing.
Mm-hmm. And I want to extend that as an invitation. Currently, Special Collections and Archives is just open to those in the Bowdoin community that are part of our testing protocol. But if you are within that cohort and you're on campus, we would encourage you to make an appointment Monday through Friday. We're currently open 1 to 5 p.m. by appointment to come get hands-on with Angela's work. I'd also encourage those of you who would like to travel to Maine at some point in the future to keep an eye and please do come to our reading room to engage with Angela's work in the future. So our next question is from Tori, who says, you mentioned you're done collecting. Could you talk a little about your process of coming to that decision and how it felt?
Okay, well, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I avoid markets, antique shops, etc. If someone wants to give me something really cool, I am happy. And one of the most special gifts I received recently and I'm sorry that I don't have it to show you because it's in Maine, actually. But it's a tin. It's this very grim gray tin with very grim sans serif writing, and it says, it's drinking water. It's drinking water. And it's just like a little can, like a Coke can of drinking water. And it's from Massachusetts. And, you know, the government would set aside drinking water in tin cans in case of emergencies and things like that. So this was really a Cold War type. I'm thinking, what good is a little can gonna do anyone? But anyway, so I love getting presents, and people do give me antique things. But yeah, if I would collect things if I was more exposed to them. But I'm very, and I pick up trash all the time. So free things. So I find Post-its all the time, notes, shopping lists, things like that. And I'm making a series of paintings that are going to be exhibited next month in Italy, and then I'm making an artist book with them. So I continue to use my archives, and I photograph things as well. So, I mean, I collect by photographing, and but I try not to buy anything. I try to use what I have because I have 100 categories already. I have so much material. So I trying to keep it under control and not waste.
I think that leads us into another question that we have here from Gay Walker. What is your current project or projects?
Yeah, it's really hard to choose. So there's two that I hope to crank out shortly. One's on and it ties into all the things we've been talking about today. It ties into the history of philanthropy. So it's all about, for thousands of years, patrons, philanthropists, they've always existed, and how they interact with artifacts and buildings and architecture and museums and public spaces. And another one is actually, it's a very, very good question to ask because it has to do with fakes in a way, and with the interplay of artifacts, you have people trying to profit from things, whether it's humans and slavery, or whether it's manufactured items, or whether it's things to be used for medicine historically, or whether today things to be used in cell phones, things becoming very precious all of a sudden in the trade of that. But things have been faked also for thousands of years for profit, for trade, for making money. And so I'm working on Vermeer. I'm working on the actual canvas weaves of Vermeer that a couple of mathematicians that I'm working with, they came up with an algorithm to show the density, sort of like when you buy the thread count, so like of your sheets or pillows, things like that, the thread density. And so they came up with an algorithm so that you can see that, and that way you can tell which of Vermeer's paintings were adjacent, perhaps on a piece of canvas. You can learn more about the objects. It wasn't made to find out what fakes are, but it could be another way of learning about the object. And there was a man an artist in the 20th century that created fake Vermeers that were very successful. And what he did was he got canvases from the 1600s and he sanded them down, and then he painted on them so that people would say, oh, well, they're antique. And I'm so glad that Gay Walker asked that question, because in conclusion, archives in the world. So I've been able to do some research in West Africa, in India, in South America, just briefly and a long time ago. But so these are palm leaf manuscripts, and well, they're palm leaves, okay, but they're blanks. And I was able to go to the National Library in Bhubaneswar on the Bay of Bengal, and I'm specifically interested in palm leaf manuscripts. Are fascinating, but they are made in shapes that relate to the form. So, symbolic form and content. And I find that fascinating, being a conceptual kind of an artist that uses knowledge in conceptual ways in art. So it's a whole library, but instead of books, there are all these flat things laying down, and how the library had to be created around them. But anyways, wonderful head of the library director, very interesting man. He said, we've sequestered all of these blanks that are antique, and he used to keep them safe from people that would counterfeit them so that they could make fake old palm leaf manuscripts and sell them for profit. And so he said, I would like to give these to you, but you have to be very careful and protect them and make sure that nobody uses them to try to make something old. So yeah, I'm working on artifacts always and fakes, but the Vermeers, the canvas weaves that have been generated by algorithms, and they just look like my beautiful micro-striped paintings. So I'm painting the computer algorithms of the Vermeer canvases.
Amazing. I want to be conscious of the time, and we have 2 questions that I want to try to sneak in. So thank you, and I apologize if we're not getting to your question today. First is just a quick one from Barbara Blumenthal. Hi, Barbara. The name of the Riddle wallpaper book.
Riddle.
Or Riddle and Riddle. Okay, great. and then our final question, which I think is a wonderful way to wrap up, is from Victoria, who says, thank you so much for your wisdom, talent, and extraordinary storytelling. I am curious, have you always had interdisciplinary interests, and how did you find art/artist book creation in order to explore those interests as opposed to another activity or field?
So I've always been an interdisciplinary kind of person, but I love art. I love making things. I studied film, but I need to make things. Although, artist books are sequential art, so you can exploit them like I did in the wallpaper book, in terms of controlling how information reaches the viewer, which is something you can't do in a painting. The same could be said of the tie book. They're like, you can create an obstacle course. That said, you have no control over how your work will be perceived, whether the message will get there. And I try to always give some kind of surface pleasure and humor, because I don't expect people to do research or understand necessarily, but I also write about them, and I make it available on my website, which is currently Angelonium. So artist books, I didn't know they were a genre, but because I had been doing so much printmaking, but also, ceramics and color studies and, all sorts of wonderful visual art in high school, because I was very lucky to go to a high school that had a great art department. And my instructor did know of the existence of artist books. So when I said, I want to make a book, it's going to be a scroll, blah, 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 she said, well, this actually exists as a genre. She pointed me to some books, some places in New York City. I'm in Massachusetts. I got myself to New York City. I stayed at a friend's house, and I went and I looked at a couple of the galleries that were showing artist books. And I wasn't dissuaded from my original concept, but that's when I first became aware of the genre. I think for people that are interested in creating images, especially editioning, so like print making is already something you do in editions. I think that printmaking, you can use anything, you can combine anything. I mean, I cook spaghetti and glue it onto cardboard, and then I ink that and print that. Printmaking, there's really no rules. I kind of apply that to all of visual art. But let's just say it was a wonderful segue into artist books. Was there another part of the question?
I think that was it. And I am grateful for
interdisciplinary. So
yes. Oh yeah.
That since I had a feeling that I would be doing art, and writing to a certain extent for the rest of my life. So I didn't want to go to an art school specifically. I wanted to feed my mind.
Mhm.
And so I went to a liberal arts school. Uh, and then I, ended up doing some art in college. But basically, I think I made the right choice for me because the information and the learning is as important to me as finding interesting ways to communicate it. So,
What a wonderful note to end on. Angela, I want to thank you so much for your thoughtful and just incredible talk. I have so many notes written down that I want to think more on. So thank you personally for offering me that. And thanks to all of you for attending. Just a quick note to Mary Hart's drawing students, you will reconvene on your regular Wednesday Zoom after this. Again, a thank you to Tony Sprague for helping us out with the IT, to the Bowdoin College Library for their support, and of course to the Harold and Iris Chandler Lectureship Fund for sponsoring this. Angela, it is so wonderful to see you. Take good care, and we cannot wait to bring you back to campus in person to talk to us more and to get hands-on. So thank you.
thanks, Marika.
Take care, all.